Good evening. I'm Neil Gordon, CEO of the Discovery Museum. So welcome. I'm here at the museum to kick off the 2021 Discovery Museum Speaker Series. Speaker Series are conversations with expert voices on matters of importance to our communities. The series is always free of charge and open to the public. So I'm really excited about tonight's conversation, and apparently it's a conversation that you all want to have as well. We have over 3,300 registrants for this event from 47 different states. That's 10 times more than we've had for any speaker over the past 9 years. So we're looking forward to this a lot. So a bit of housekeeping. Due to the large numbers, we've had to solicit your questions in advance, and we've shared them with our moderator. As a result, the Q&A function and the chat features have been disabled for the duration of the program. Tonight's presentation will be closed caption. You can turn that feature on and off at the bottom of your screen. This evening's presentation will be recorded. All registrants will receive a link to the recording by email once it's available, and it will also be posted on our website. So I have two things I'd like to share with you before introducing our guests. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors. So I'd really like to thank the organizations whose sponsorship of this series have allowed us to present it free of charge for its 9th year. Our lead sponsor, the Foundation for Metro West, was established in 1995 and is the only community foundation serving the Metro West region of Massachusetts. It promotes philanthropy across the area, helps donors maximize the impact of their local giving, serves as a resource for us nonprofit organizations, and enhances the quality of life for all. Our investor sponsor, Enterprise Bank, is headquartered in Lowell, Massachusetts, with 26 branch locations throughout the Merrimack Valley and the north central regions of Massachusetts, as well as southern New Hampshire. They are a true community bank, leading with a deep sense of mission and purpose. Their success is consistently measured by the success of the individuals, businesses, and communities they enthusiastically serve. So we thank the foundation, the bank, and all of our generous sponsors for their support. So now just a bit about the Discovery Museum. The Discovery Museum has been serving the children and families of Massachusetts for nearly 40 years. And as I mentioned, this is the 9th year of our Discovery Museum Speaker Series. We are proud of the series, conversations on topics we know are important to kids and the families in these complex and challenging times. In addition to tonight's important topic, upcoming events will address topics of the critical role of grandparents to children on the autism spectrum, identifying and confronting the early pathways to addiction and dependence, the power of messages kids receive through children's literature, and supporting empowered lives for children with disabilities. These events are, as I've mentioned, always free of charge, and the registration is now open. So please go to our website and feel free to register for these events. Now, I know many of you don't know our museum. If you did, you'd know about the foundation of our work. These things are such as, we believe in the natural creativity and curiosity of children, and we work to nurture that. We understand the importance of kids learning alongside the adults in their lives. And we recognize that understanding is as important, if not more important, than knowledge. We serve kids both at our museum and in their classroom with hands-on STEM, which of course right now we're doing virtually. And as always, we prioritize access in all we do. Even in a pandemic year in which we are closed to the public for more than 4 months, and now we operate at just 20% of our capacity, we try to ensure that anyone who wants to visit can do so. We work to eliminate the financial, cultural, physical, and developmental barriers that can keep families from a museum experience. Importantly, in all we do, we stand up for kids proudly. Now let's get to the point of tonight. I really want to welcome Dr. Beverly Tatum and Tiziana Deering. Greetings to both of you. Dr. Tatum, we're really so pleased and excited that you accepted our invitation to share your knowledge and expertise and experience with everyone tonight. We all need to help understand how to talk to kids, the kids in our lives, about race and racism, and frankly, how to talk to each other about it as well. So thank you for being here. And Tiziana, thank you for taking the time out to be with us and we're so fortunate that you've agreed to be here and moderate this discussion. Now, before I let you guys get started, I'm going to tell everyone a bit about both of you. Dr. Beverly Tatum, Daniel Tatum, is a clinical psychologist widely known for both her expertise on race relations and as a thought leader in higher education. She's a sought-after speaker on the topics of racial identity development, race in education, strategies for creating inclusive campus environments, and higher education leadership. Dr. Tatum is president emerita of Spelman College. Her 13 years there as president were marked by innovation and growth, and her visionary leadership was recognized in 2013 with the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award. Dr. Tatum is the author of several books, including the national bestseller, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?, the 20th anniversary edition of which was released in 2017. Dr. Tatum holds a bachelor's in psychology from Wesleyan University and an MA and PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan, as well as a master's in religious studies from the Hartford Seminary. Tiziana Deering, who's graciously going to be our moderator tonight, you all know is the host of Radio Boston on WBUR. Now, she's also been a contributor and commentator to BUR for more than a decade, contributing to a number of regional and national outlets as well. Prior to joining Radio Boston, Tiziana was a professor at Boston College in the School of Social Work, where she taught social innovation and leadership. A longtime anti-poverty advocate, Tiziana also ran Boston Rising, a startup fund to end generational poverty in Boston. Among many things, she was the first woman president of Catholic Charities for the Archdiocese of Boston. Tiziana has won a number of awards in the Boston area, including the Pinnacle Award from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce and the Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40 recognition. Dr. Tatum, thank you again for being with us. It's such a pleasure and we're excited. Tiziana, it's all yours.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Dr. Tatum. Thank you for sharing your time with all of us. I just want to give our audience a little sense of what to expect from our time together. We did get lots of questions from the audience in advance. I want you to know that I read through those all before I prepared the conversation with Dr. Tatum. So you can expect some of those questions will get asked in the conversation Dr. Tatum and I will have, which will be around 30 to 40 minutes. And then we'll turn to a Q&A and I'll use questions from those you submitted as an audience, and Dr. Tatum and I will talk through those. Somewhere around 8:15, 8:20-ish, we'll do some wrap up so that we're mindful of everyone's time. Does that all sound good and comfortable to you, Dr. Tatum?
It sounds great. And I want to just say thank you for being the moderator. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And thank you also to Neil for such a lovely and warm introduction.
That's great. And I'm looking forward to learning from you. So in preparing for tonight, I read a lot of what you've written. I listened to a lot of your talks. And so I'm going to start this a little differently than I would normally start an interview, because I want to ask you, is there something that you would say to this large audience of listeners that will help them listen and learn better over our time together? Is there a piece of advice or guidance or framing or a set of ears that you recommend people come into this with to really be able to learn as well as possible from what you're going to share?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And I actually, there's two things. The first is just how grateful I am that so many people have tuned in, because this is an important conversation. And so I appreciate that. But I think that it's helpful, and maybe I'm going to just launch us right into this. I think it's helpful for everyone to give some thought at the very beginning to their own early experiences with racism or understanding race. And I say that because many people think, well, gosh, why should I be having even these conversations with young children? But when I ask people to think about their own earliest memory of a race related experience, many people will say, gosh, I remember something when I was 4, when I was 5, when I was 6. Not everyone. Some people will say, I was in high school. I was in college. What, depending on where you grew up, what the population was like. But many people have an early childhood experience. And I think it's important to tune into that, because it reminds us that, yeah, kids do notice. They do have questions. And when you ask people the thing that they remember, the stories vary, but often it has to do with something someone did or said or observed, maybe something they said or did to the child, or something that the child witnessed happening to somebody else. But if you ask people how they felt about what happened, they usually will tell you some emotion that has some uncomfortable feeling attached, like sadness or anger or embarrassment or shame or fear or anxiety or confusion. Again, not everyone will feel that way. Some people will say friendship, love, depending on what it is that they recalled. But for a lot of people, it's an uncomfortable feeling. And then if you ask them, well, did you talk to anybody about it at the time that it occurred? Most people will say, actually, I didn't. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I haven't thought about this in many years, but I didn't talk to a parent. I didn't talk to a teacher. And if you inquire as to why, sometimes they'll say, well, maybe it was the parent or the teacher who was the source of the confusion, or simply I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language, or even more commonly, I just knew I wasn't supposed to. I just knew I wasn't supposed to bring it up, or that the adults around me signaled in some way that this was not something to ask about or talk about. And I like to start our conversation by asking people to think about that, because if you were a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old having unanswered questions with an experience that you can still remember decades later, it's very likely that the children are having experiences like that too. They may not be talking about it, but they are observing, learning things and they have questions that need answers, so that we as adults can maybe answer the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer or ask when we were kids. But yet we still feel that pit in our stomach, maybe that knot in our stomach, when someone says, gee, let's talk about this. Because so much of the messages around us have been, shh, be silent about it. And that's, the purpose of this conversation tonight is to break that silence. So on the one hand, I just want people to breathe deeply, relax. This is about learning, but it's also about recognizing that this is something we all have experience with.
So there's like 10 things I want to ask just coming out of that. And I think the first one, I was going to ask this later, but based on you starting there, I'll ask it now. One of the things that came up in the audience questions, and I've heard asked so many times before too, is some variation of, I am afraid to start conversations about race with children, especially younger children, because I'm afraid that by doing that, I am creating a racial awareness or racializing something that otherwise they wouldn't. And maybe I'm doing harm instead of doing good. I imagine you hear that quite a bit.
I do hear it quite a bit. And what I would say is that you don't actually have to start the conversation. If you're listening carefully, you are likely to hear your child start the conversation. You're likely to hear your child ask a question about, Mommy, why is that person's skin so dark? Or, as one of my children said to me, Mommy, why don't they match? Talking about a mom and a child who were of different ethnic backgrounds. They didn't look the same. Why don't they match? I mean, there are all kinds of ways that children raise the question. And if you're listening, you can respond in an age-appropriate way that doesn't, as I said to my son, they don't have to match. Sometimes moms and kids match and sometimes they don't. And you can have a longer conversation about that or a shorter one. But the fact is, kids have questions. And if we are so anxious that we can't respond, they pick up on that anxiety. And then it's not a natural conversation. It's what's wrong with this? Why can't we talk about it? And that really, I think, is the message we don't want to convey, but we are, through our silence, often saying, this is so problematic, we can't even talk about it.
Why is it so hard for us to talk about race?
Well, I think, if we go back to the history of racial conflict, if we go back to the history of racism, we know that it's a painful subject. We know that hard things have happened, whether that's the, assault on Indigenous people and the, ways in which they were mistreated. If we think about slavery, there's a lot of harm has been done in the name of racial difference. It's important to say that today in the 21st century, we know that there's really only one race, and that's the human race, right? From a biological perspective. But we know that there are racialized groups that are perceived as being separate from one another, characteristics applied to those groups as a result of stereotyping, and the impact, even though the categories are made up, the impact is real in people's daily lives in terms of the ways in which racism operates in our society, systematically advantaging one group over other groups. And so, because there is often shame and sadness and distress of various kinds about that history, there's a desire to not have to talk about it. But that history isn't really in the past. We see it playing itself out in the present every day. And if we want our children to know how to navigate in an anti-racist way, and in order to interrupt the cycle of racism, we have to help them understand unfairness and how to create more fairness, how to create equity. You can't do that without talking about it. As I like to say, you can't solve a problem without talking about it.
So you talked a minute ago about various groups in our history who have been racialized. Whiteness has not been racialized. And so I wonder, in your work in working with families, in your research, have you come up with a framework or a way to talk about or articulate the challenges for white people and white families in initiating conversations on race and in participating in them? It's not a facility that white culture, which has been an unracialized culture, has developed.
Well, it's an unracialized culture in the sense of seeing as other, right? White people in a white dominant society don't talk about themselves as different, but as normal, as the norm, right? And so, to the extent that if you and your children are the norm in the community where you live, the majority, the cultural standard, if that's the case for you, then you may not be thinking of yourself. I had a student, to use this as an example. I as you know, have been a college professor for many years and taught a course on the psychology of racism. And I remember being in a class, predominantly white class, but racially mixed, and asking on the first day of the class, my students to describe themselves in terms of their own racial and ethnic background. And one young woman had grown up in a very racially homogeneous community, But didn't describe herself as white. That wasn't a word she used. She didn't quite know how to describe herself. And finally she said, "I'm just normal." And that notion of being just normal is, I think, an experience that many people have, particularly in the context of continuing residential segregation, which is still part of the experience of many white families in particular. And so what does it mean it's like not noticing. You don't notice your whiteness, but of course it is part of your daily experience. But in the context of talking to children, let's say 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, you can certainly introduce the range of human experience, the range of human appearance, if not in your neighborhood because people live there, through the books you read together, through the pictures you look at in magazines, through the videos you watch together. Particularly today in 2021, there are many resources available with children of color depicted in storylines that can be part of a conversation with a young child, part of the rotation of stories reading at bedtime or whatever that opportunity is for you.
So I want to go back to a couple of your comments you made early on. And I think I'll pick up this thread because many people wrote in with some variation on this question, which is you said, if you listen to a child, they will raise the issue and then you can respond in an age appropriate way. And we had so many questions about learning what is age appropriate in terms of conversations about race in different age cohorts. Now, I don't even know how you define the cohorts, but maybe you could walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think I'm going to focus on the youngest kids, right? But the first thing that is important to know, parents should know that children are not colorblind, right? Parents will tell you, my daughter or my son is colorblind. Kids are not colorblind. And what I mean by that is they do notice difference and they comment on it. They may over time become what I call color silent, meaning they learn that they're not supposed to comment. And so they stop commenting, but they do notice. And that noticing can be observed in children as young as 6 months old in terms of how long they stare at faces of different backgrounds, different shades. So we know that children notice difference and they are curious about it by their visual cues. We know that, researchers know that. But let's say by the time a kid is verbal, which for most children is somewhere in their 2 years, they're talking and they're engaging you in conversation. 2-year-olds are curious about difference. It's the 2-year-old who might be in a store and point out the dark-skinned person if they haven't seen one before, let's say, might make a comment about that. Certainly 3-year-olds are going to express that kind of curiosity. If you think about the fact that many children are going into preschool at the age, once they're potty trained, then they're, going to maybe a daycare center or a preschool. They may be encountering children whose physical appearance is different from their own in terms of skin color or hair texture or those kinds of things. Those are comments, those are observations that kids are likely to comment on. I did a TED Talk, which I imagine some people in our audience might have seen. It's available on YouTube. It's called, "Is My Skin Brown Because I Drank Chocolate Milk?" That title comes from a conversation that one of my sons had when he was 3 with one of his white classmates. He was in a preschool where he was the only Black child in his class. And one of his friends saw him drinking some chocolate milk and told him, "Your skin is brown because you drink too much chocolate milk." And he came home and asked me, "Mom, is this true?" Now, the child who said it was not trying to be mean. He was making an observation. My son's skin is brown. He's drinking some brown milk. That must be the reason, right? But clearly that conversation that I had with my son in which I said, "No, your skin's not brown. Your skin's not brown because of chocolate milk. Your skin is brown because you have something in your skin called melanin. Everybody has some. The more you have, the browner your skin is. And we talked about that. And then I said, and in your class, you are the kid with the most. Well, he was tickled by the fact of having the most of something. But my point here is that conversation is a very classic 3-year-old conversation. It's, I'm observing a difference. I'm wondering what it is. I'm asking questions about it. Even at 3, one of the characteristics of very young children is that they are not absolutely certain that they're going to stay the way they are. Meaning, can my skin change? Can his skin change? What that sense of fixed identity is something that happens when you're a little older, maybe 5 or 6. So, but the kinds of questions that kids are asking are showing up. But what's more perhaps insidious is that the stereotypes that are associated with racial difference are also being internalized. Kids are observing television shows they watch. Kids are observing who gets to do what in the books you read, or are missing completely. Kids are overhearing the language that family members or neighbors are using, so that it's not unusual to hear 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds talk about, you can't be, fill in the blank, you can't be the princess. Only girls with long hair can be the princesses. Those kinds of comments reflect an internalization of the cultural norms and standards. So parents are sometimes surprised that their kids have internalized some of these negative messages, and you have to really be intentional about counteracting them by offering counter examples to the dominant narrative, even with young children.
So 2 things stemming off of that. First, those counter examples, even with young children. You mentioned your TEDx talk. I saw the TEDx Stanford one. I'm assuming
that's the one I'm talking about. Yes.
Yeah, and you tell this story about engaging. I want to get it right, so I'm looking at my notes here on this. You tell the story about engaging with your 4-year-old son on the question of slavery. And you talk about how thoughtful you were in how you were going to frame that conversation.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could share that story with this group and then talk to folks a little bit about how one can be intentional about the way you frame and enter into a conversation about race to then guide it into a more empowering or affirming place as you go along.
Absolutely. So for those who haven't seen that talk, it's important to say that I was not planning to have a conversation with my 4-year-old about slavery. So this is to say, we were in the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon doing our grocery shopping, and I'm sure you can imagine, that experience, the small child sitting in the cart. And we are doing our grocery shopping, and my 4-year-old says to me, Mom, Tommy says I'm Black. Am I Black? And I said, yes. And he said, but my skin is brown. Now, my son's skin is kind of a medium brown color. And so he was certainly right about that. It was not black like the crayon black. And I said, well, you're right about that. I said, but Black is a term that people use to describe people who are African American, people whose ancestors came from Africa. And they use the term white to describe lighter skinned people whose ancestors came from Europe, European Americans. And we talked about the fact that, so-called Black people were not really Black, but various shades of brown, and the various shades of brown even within our own family. And then I talked about the fact that so-called white people weren't really white. They were various shades of sometimes light brown, sometimes kind of pink or peach. And my son said something funny to me. I had my grocery list on a piece of white paper. And I said, they're not white like this paper. And he said, yes, they are. And I said, I don't think so. We were in the grocery store and we were alone in the aisle where we were. And so I said, well, let's go find one and see. And we went around the corner, and sure enough, there was a white woman shopping, and we, whispering in his ear about her appearance and my paper, and he agreed that not quite the same. But we were having, yeah, not quite the same, exactly. We were having that conversation. And then, but I was concerned by and this is, the parental listening. I was concerned about the tone of voice in which he asked me this question. Like, am I Black? Like, is this a problem? Like maybe there's something wrong with being Black. And so having described, now I should point out that this confusion, the language that adults use, these categories that adults use, is confusing to a preschooler who's learning the color of his crayons, right? You're learning these colors and people are using these words and they don't match up. And so that is a common confusion. But as I was trying to affirm his identity as a young African-American boy, I was talking about pride in having ancestors from Africa. And I was talking about what I knew about the African continent. And my son said to me in a very precocious way, if Africa is so great, what are we doing here? And I didn't know how I could answer that question in any authentic and honest way without talking about the history of slavery. And so while I didn't intend to have a conversation with my 4-year-old about slavery, there we were. And so I said, well, that's a great question. And I gave a very abbreviated, sort of snippet of history about how a long time ago, emphasizing long time ago, I was never a slave, you were never a slave, grandmommy and granddaddy were never slaves. But a long time ago, when this place where we live now didn't have grocery stores and didn't have roads and didn't have all these houses, people from Europe came and wanted to build things like this here, and they needed strong and smart workers, and they didn't have enough. And so they went to Africa to get the strongest, smartest workers they could find. Unfortunately, they did not want to pay them, and they kidnapped them. They brought them against their will, and that was really unfair. And I talked about making people work without paying them and not letting them go home when they wanted to go home, and how unfair that was. And that's what slavery was about. But in telling that story, I really wanted to not frighten my 4-year-old, which is why I kept emphasizing this was a long time ago, not anything you have to worry about. And two, I didn't want to just talk about his ancestors as victims. So I talked about the fact that many people tried to escape, and some people were successful in trying to do that. And I wanted him to know that there were allies, and that not all the European Americans, not all the white people were slave owners, not all of them believed in slavery, and many of them worked to try to help people get out of slavery and make an end. And together, they were able to bring an end to slavery. So now the good news is that was a long time ago, and now it's illegal. You can't have slaves anymore. And so we talked about that. And then he was listening very carefully. And as I said, I wanted to emphasize both agency, as in, not being just a victim, but being able to exercise some agency on the part of his ancestors. And two, the importance of having allies, and the fact that there were people who believed in fairness and didn't think that this was a good thing. And then I said, it was all over. And then he said to me, well, when they weren't slaves anymore, why didn't they go back to Africa? And I said, well, actually, some did. I knew enough history to know that. And so I said, some did go back. I said, but for other people, it might have been really hard to go back because maybe they didn't have enough money or didn't have enough opportunity. Or maybe by that time they wanted to stay here because they had friends and family members here. And then my son concluded, and this is a nice place too. And I said, yes, it is. And, brought that conversation to a close with a sigh of relief, I might say, because as I said, I was not really prepared to have this conversation or anticipating having such a painful conversation with a 4-year-old.
So for you in the grocery store, it was kind of a whew. It wasn't like, this is no problem. I know exactly how to do this.
Oh no, I was making it up as I went along. but having said that, I mean, I am a psychologist, and I knew enough to know that it needed to be concrete and not to scare and to. But I also retrospectively was happy that I was able to have that conversation with my son, because I was able to frame it in a way that met his psychological needs from my perspective, as opposed to, someone else perhaps teaching about it in school in a way that I would not have necessarily found helpful.
So, in listening to you, you said at one point you wanted to talk to him about it in a way, I'm looking at my notes, that was authentic and honest.
Yes.
And my antenna peaked up there, because so often when kids ask us hard questions, it is in fact not our instinct to give an authentic, honest answer. It's our instinct to make something up or brush it off or tell a silly story. And so when a child asks about race, how does one balance the painful truths and the challenging subjects with what I think I'm hearing from you is the importance of authenticity and honesty?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to say that a child might ask questions about physical difference that we associate with race, and that conversation does not need to be a hard or loaded conversation. Sometimes adults bring their own anxiety into it, but if someone asks, let's imagine Tommy went home, the white child who had the chocolate milk theory, went home and said, Mom, I saw Jonathan drinking chocolate milk today. I think that's why his skin is brown. That mother doesn't need to freak out about that. She needs to just say, no, that's not why his skin is brown. He's got something in his skin called melanin. You have some too. That's why you got a tan when you went to visit grandma in Florida. It was the melanin in your skin that turned it brown, helps protect your skin from the sun. It's an easy conversation. And it's like, why are your eyes blue? Why are my eyes brown? Why is your hair blonde? Why is my hair brown? All of these are just physical differences. And, because people come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and, different hair, it's, if two white children were in the same family and they were talking about, one had dark hair and one had light hair, blonde hair, it wouldn't be a big deal. They'd just be they would notice their differences. They would comment about them. When we are talking about the differences that have been categorized racially, it feels more emotionally laden, but it doesn't have to be. And that's, I think, important, because it's just part of the range of human experience, right? But when we're talking about racism, the mistreatment of people because of the way they've been racially categorized, slavery being an example of that, that's harder because it feels so painful, right? It feels painful. This is, we've just celebrated the Martin Luther King holiday. The story of Dr. King, the Civil Rights March. There are children's books that talk about Ruby Bridges, desegregating schools, Rosa Parks and her struggle, the bus boycott. There are children's books about those things, and that's one way to have those conversations, to talk about the unfairness of the past, and to talk about how some of that unfairness of the past still happens today. The unfairness of, what, let's imagine you are riding around your city or your town, and you see homeless people. And I live in Atlanta. Not all, but many of the homeless people you will see in Atlanta are Black people. And so a child might say, why are Black people always, why are so many Black people homeless? Why are all the homeless people Black? I mean, that might be a question. And then you could have a conversation about why it might be that folks from this particular group are more likely to be unemployed because of discrimination or limited access to education or perhaps health concerns, sometimes mental health concerns. I mean, these are topics that you can have with children in ways that underscore not just, what's wrong with that person, but what's wrong with the society when there's not enough housing for everyone, or when the housing is not available in ways that would make it possible for that person to have a home, and be out of the elements, off the sidewalk, whatever it might be. So my point here is that those things are harder to talk about, but what's important in those conversations is to underscore the possibility of change. And from my point of view, talking to kids about what we can do to make things better. If we see something that's unfair, what can we do to make it better? Can we write a letter to someone? Can we take some action that's going to help? Certainly this summer, with all the protesting around Black Lives Matter following the murder of George Floyd, many families attended marches with their children and can talk about the fact that we are here today in this protest, carrying this sign, whatever we're doing, because we think this is an unfair situation. We want it to be better. We want to make sure that it's more fair in the future.
Earlier, I asked you about, different age cohorts and talking to them about race, and you wanted to start with youngest children. And then just now you talked about the fact that when we get into the more painful conversations, we have to engage with that in a different way. And of course, as kids get older, they become more aware. You gave a talk in 2018 at a conference, and it was your talk, I think it was at the Air Force Academy. It was focused on empathy. Yes. And you talked in it about the importance of listening to stories that are hard to hear.
Yes.
And I found myself thinking about older kids, teenage kids, adolescents. And I guess it's a two-part question, but I'll just start with part one. How do we sit with and listen to stories that are hard to hear, and how do we help young people do that?
Well, certainly when we think about teenagers, it is, even, fifth graders, 10-year-olds, as kids are getting out of those early elementary school years into the middle school years, and certainly into the high school years, you can have more sophisticated conversations. And certainly with high school students, you can talk about the more complex ideas, right? Their brains are ready for more complex ideas. So having said all of that, again, listening to stories that are hard to hear means that we, the adults, have to be willing to listen to the story that's hard to hear, right? And sometimes adults are not. So the first thing I would say is that we as adults have to practice listening. We have to practice having that conversation. We have to educate ourselves so that we can respond to it might mean reading a few books. It might mean watching some documentaries or some TED Talks to be able to feel ready to respond. But even as I say that, you don't have to have all the questions all answered, because it's possible to say, I don't know, let's find out about that together, right? We can explore this question together. That's a great question. I don't know the answer. Let's talk, let's look into it together. But let's talk about something like the murder of George Floyd. I mean, how painful that was. And many people, watching that video on television, on their screens, on their iPhones. And so certainly if you've got young children, you don't want them to see that. Those are images that once they're in your brain, they're hard to get out. And young children should be protected from those kinds of images, though sometimes they stumble across them in, because you're watching the TV, they walk in at the wrong time or whatever. But older kids can ask the question, well, why is that happening? Why is that? What's the history? Why is it that so many more Black men and women, actually, but why is it that so many more Black people are the targets of this kind of violence at the hands of police. What is that about? Well, you can look at the history of policing, and you can look at how policing started really with slave catching, right? You know, that the history of law enforcement in the United States really can be traced back to the Runaway Fugitive Slave Act, which is not to say that that was the only kind of law enforcement going on, but the relationship between the police and Black people in the United States has an unpleasant history rooted in this experience going back to the days of enslavement. That said, you can have those conversations. You can talk about the unfairness. You can talk about, you know, what would need to change, what would make a difference. You know, why is it that, you know, some drug laws are enforced in this way with incarceration, and other drug violations are talked about as public health issues? The opioid epidemic, which is largely impacting white communities, is being talked about as a public health crisis, not as a law enforcement challenge. And so, but when it was crack cocaine in Black communities, it was all about law enforcement and heavily penalized violators going to jail for much longer periods of time than white kids using powder cocaine. You know, the ethics of that is a conversation you can have with a teenager.
So we are really right at the point where it would be time for us to move into me reading you some of the audience questions. Is there anything you want to add to any of the questions I've already asked you before we move to some that came from our pre-registered viewers?
Well, what I want to say, I think it's, and then this may come up in the questions, you know, as we're talking, it's clear, and I imagine that I'm imagining an audience, you know, parents sitting at home saying, this is overwhelming to me. It's too complicated. And what I want to say is, it's not that complicated. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have all the answers. What you have to have, I think, is some courage to say, you know, I don't know. Let's find out together. You know, it's an important topic. And I think we need to, you know, it's a problem in our society that people aren't treated fairly. And there are things we can do to make it a more fair society. Or there are ways in which I didn't even notice. I mean, some parents might say, you know, I've just started thinking about this. I didn't think about it when my kids were younger. I didn't think about it really till the summer. I didn't think about it till I was on this call, you know, on this program. How do I get started? There are a lot of resources available. And that's the really good news. You can go to places like socialjusticebooks.org, for example, if you're looking for resources, books that you can read with your children. Socialjusticebooks.org curates lists on all kinds of social justice topics. You can find resources at places like in the greater Boston area, particularly for older kids, Facing History and Ourselves is a great, has tools for teachers. There are many websites, but I think of Teaching Tolerance, for example, resources for how to talk about these issues in classrooms. So there's just a lot of material available, and you don't have to do it alone.
So just socialchangebooks.org.
Yes.
Facing History and Ourselves.
Yes.
And the third one, sorry, right back out of my head.
I mentioned Teaching Tolerance.
Teaching Tolerance, just to give our audience who are grabbing a pencil a chance to grab it and write those down again.
Yes.
Okay, so shall we move to some of the audience?
Yes,
Q&A?
please.
Okay, so I think I'll pick this one first. How do I, a white teacher, name and discuss racism with a majority white student base in a way that does not put the one or two students of color who might be in my class on the spot?
Yes.
That's one of the questions that came in.
And it's a great question. You know, in my early days as a researcher, I studied the experiences of Black youth living in predominantly white communities. And one of the things that the young people I interviewed often talked about would be that moment where they were the only Black kid in the class, when, you know, maybe they were talking about slavery in the social studies unit or the civil rights era. And, you know, all the white kids would sort of turn and look at this one Black child in the class to see how he or she was responding to the content area. Or maybe the teacher calls on that child and says, you know, Susie, what do Black people think about, you know, which is would be horrible, but it happens, right? And so you would hear these stories from young people saying how awkward that was. And so I appreciate the fact that this teacher is trying to avoid those kind of awkward moments. But let's say, even if you're not talking about contemporary racism, but you're just teaching social studies, sooner or later, you're going to come up to that period where you're talking about the history of slavery, or maybe you're talking about the civil rights era. And the focus of the class is likely to turn, and it happens so commonly, to the young Black child in the class. But the teacher can nip that in this way, to say, you know, I noticed that when we talked about fill in the blank, when we talked about the bus boycott, or when we talked about the history of enslavement, some of you started to look toward Michael. And we often wonder what that experience was like for the Black people, but I'd like to ask a different question. What do you think was the experience of the white people at that time? What were the white people thinking? You know, and that kind of puts it back, not centering. You don't want to decenter. You don't want to center whiteness in the way that leaves other people out. But this notion that this is only relevant to the target, not to the people who were actually engaging in the enslavement, or, you know, perpetuating the segregation. What were they thinking? How, you know, what was going on there? Let's understand that. Where were the allies? Let's talk about the allies. Who were the, you know, where were the white upstanders, to use that facing history language, who were speaking up and standing up in solidarity with the people who were being victimized? So there are ways to shift the focus in that way. But I'd like to share an example, a personal example that came, which I thought was really well done. This was a 5th grade teacher. When my oldest son was in the 5th grade, it was December, and the class was acknowledging the winter holidays. Of course, Christmas being the most prominent one. But the teacher wanted to acknowledge that there were Jewish kids in the class celebrating Hanukkah, and she was just talking about winter holidays, and she wanted to talk about Kwanzaa. My son was the only Black kid in the class, and she wanted to ask him about Kwanzaa. Now, she could have put him on the spot, and maybe he didn't know anything about Kwanzaa. That would have certainly been hard and embarrassing for him. What she did instead, which is what I thought was really insightful, was call our house. She called to speak to me, and she asked first, does your family celebrate Kwanzaa? Well, as it happened, we did celebrate Kwanzaa. We celebrate Christmas, but we also had a Kwanzaa celebration at our home. And I said, we do celebrate Kwanzaa. And then she said, well, I'd like to include Kwanzaa in this celebration of winter holidays. And I'm wondering if Jonathan would be willing to talk about it with his classmates. And I appreciated her asking that question rather than, you know, just putting him on the spot. And I said, I'll ask him if he'd like to do that. And so I asked him. He was delighted to be able to come and share something. So he brought in the symbols, the objects that we use as part of our Kwanzaa celebration, and shared with his classmates about Kwanzaa. But it was done in a way that allowed him to shine and feel good about it, as opposed to spotlighting him in a way that perhaps he might not have been prepared for or felt awkward about. And that kind of conversation is one way to do it. But another way is to simply acknowledge, when you're talking about a subject that is sensitive in this way, is to acknowledge that there are voices that are missing. You know, we're going to be talking about a subject it's Black History Month. We're going to be celebrating Black History Month. I want to acknowledge that there aren't very many Black kids in our school. And for that reason, we're not going to hear from a lot of different points of view. And it's important to remember that each of us only speaks for ourselves. None of us represents a particular group. Each of us is an individual. To sort of set some framework around the conversation so that you don't always put that token child of a particular group feeling like they have to speak for everyone in their group.
Before I go on to the next question, I just want to note Neil has chatted to say that the resources you suggested earlier will be posted in follow-up emails to the people who registered for tonight's event. So folks, those resources will come in at least one follow-up email to you. There are so many other questions from this list. I think the next one I'll pick is, what is the best way to help young people recognize and deal with their own racial biases without shaming them in that process of discovery?
Well, I think the first thing is how we know that the bias is there, right? Well, how is that likely to show up? It's likely to show up in somebody's comment, something that someone says. It just coincidentally today, I was watching a TED Talk by a psychologist, a fellow psychologist whose name is Jennifer Eberhardt. And Jennifer Dr. Eberhardt has written a book called Biased, B-I-A-S-E-D, Biased. And she was giving a TED Talk about it, and I just happened to be watching it today. And in the book and in her talk, she tells a story. Jennifer Eberhardt is African-American, and she tells a story of being on a plane with her 5-year-old son. They were traveling somewhere together, and he looked up and saw a man on the plane, another African-American, and said, "Mom, there's someone on the plane looks like Daddy." She looked, in her view, he didn't look like Daddy, but he was the only Black man on the plane. And, but then her 5-year-old said something that was quite striking to her. He said, "I hope he doesn't rob the plane." And she, of course, was startled by this comment. And she said, "What do you mean?" And then he repeated it. He said, "Well, I hope he doesn't rob the plane." And then she asked him, like, "Why would you say that?" And then he said, "Well, he looked like sometimes robbers look like that," or something like that. And she said to her son, "Well, Daddy wouldn't rob the plane." And he said, "No, he wouldn't." And then the kid was obviously now starting to feel a little embarrassed about what he said. But what she asked him was, "I'm wondering why you said that."
Mm-hmm.
And then he's a 5-year-old, right? And he paused and he said, "I don't know why I said that. I don't know what made me think that." And of course, she tells this story as an example, even in this case, a Black child internalizing that stereotype that associates Black men with criminal activity. It's a common stereotype. And we know that in part, it's one of the reasons why Black men are over-policed, right? Because of that common stereotype. So, but when someone says something, like a child says something that you wonder, like, what does that mean? You might just ask, what do you mean by that? I'm wondering why you said that. And then the child is likely to explain, well, because whatever it is. And then to say, well, many people think that, but I happen to think that's not so true. Or maybe something like, I can see why you might have thought that because you saw that on television or because you heard somebody say that. But actually, it's not true. And here's why it's not true. But I think starting with asking the question so that you have a better understanding of what is underlying the idea. It might sound worse than it actually is, or, it may mean that there's some missing information that you can start to fill in.
There's something that you said in one of your earlier answers that made me think of one of the questions from the audience. You were you were recounting the story of talking to your son in the grocery store about slavery.
Yes.
And you said at the end of that, I was glad we had that conversation, and you gave a couple reasons. And one was because at least you got to control and provide the messaging and the framing versus if they had taught it, for example, in school in a way you wouldn't be comfortable with.
Right.
To that end, one of the audience questions just asks about engaging with in conversations about race with young people outside of the context of their parents and families. Maybe the
Yes.
parent and family doesn't know about that conversation or hasn't given permission, or maybe you're in a social context where you can't check in with the parent or family. As another adult in that kid's life, that child's life, how do you think about what your responsibilities are and how to engage in a conversation under those circumstances? Does the question make sense?
It does, and it often comes up in the context of schools. So, for example, a school may have a commitment to creating an anti-bias curriculum, right? That could be a preschool, it could be an elementary school, it could be a middle school, it could be a high school. But if the school says, we want to encourage our children to think critically about the social justice issues of the day, and we're going to have a unit in our classroom on this subject, or we are going to try to be anti-bias, anti-racist in everything that we do. This is, the pedagogical philosophy that we have at our school. And we might find, teachers sometimes find that they're teaching or talking about something only to find that there are parents who don't like what they are saying or doing, and who may say, I don't want my kid to be part of this conversation, or I think this is an inappropriate conversation. And sometimes what you have to do is help through education, through programs like this, help parents understand why it's important to have these conversations. Now, an individual teacher who's having, like, let's say you're the classroom teacher and you're doing this work and the parents are complaining to the principal about what you're doing. Well, it will help you a lot if the principal is supporting the work too, right?
Yeah.
That it's going to be hard if the principal comes to your room and says, cease and desist, right? It's going to be a different conversation if, as a school, you have said, these are important messages for our children to learn how to be. And I think this is important to say. It's not just because, it's the politically correct thing to do. We want our children to be able to think critically about these issues because it's going to make it more possible for them to be effective in the world, right? You cannot, in the 21st century, be if you don't talk about these issues, what you set up a situation where your children are not able to engage effectively with people different from themselves. And if you are in that position, if you're not able to engage with people different from yourself effectively, you are in essence a social dinosaur, because we live in a diverse and increasingly diverse society. It's necessary to be able to engage effectively. And the best way to be able to engage effectively with others is to be able to recognize your shared humanity and to not be burdened by a false hierarchy of human value.
When you said, if you can't engage with people who are different effectively, you'll be a social dinosaur. I heard a collective gasp from many parents listening who wrote questions here that were something like, I live in a homogenous community that is mostly white. I am trying to raise my children to be racially aware, bent toward equity, and yet they rarely engage with difference. So what do I do as a parent?
Well, the first thing we might think about is how you expand their world. And, the good news is there are ways to do that, certainly through written materials. We often talk about children seeing themselves reflected in books. The phrase that I have heard is, books can be mirrors where you see yourself reflected, but they can also be windows where you see into somebody else's life. And so to the extent that we are able to provide windows where you can see into the lives of other children whose backgrounds might be different from your own, through written materials, through videos, through documentaries, but also through organizations. Even if you live in a very homogeneous neighborhood, it may be that in a neighboring community, there's more diversity. It may be that there are places you can spend time where your children will naturally encounter people whose backgrounds is different from their own. Maybe those are organizations that are social justice organizations where people come together to work toward a shared goal. And because there are many people of different backgrounds interested in that, your kids are going to come into contact with those things, or those people, those ideas, those other children. One of the things that we know is that adults who have a multiracial group of friends are likely to have children who have a multiracial group of friends. Adults whose own circle is very homogeneous are likely to have children who fall in that same category. So it does help if the adults find ways to expand their network. When I was doing research on the experiences of Black families in predominantly white communities, those families were often quite intentional in trying to find other Black kids for their children to get to know, because they didn't want their children to always be the only one, right? And so what they did often would be to travel maybe a few towns over, maybe to go to a church that was had a larger Black population, or became part of a social organization. I use that example as things that Black families did, but white families can do that too, right? White families can also expand their social networks in terms of where they spend their time, even if it means traveling a little bit beyond their own community.
So I think I'll ask one, maybe two more audience questions, and then we'll move to our wrap-up discussion.
Okay.
So I'll do this one, and then if there's time, I'll do another. If not, this will be the last one. We'll see. This question is about, as we deal with our racial history, there is racial trauma.
Yes.
And that also needs to be talked about and addressed openly. But how does one do that without sharing trauma or creating trauma for kids, especially kids who may be very sensitive to trauma? How does one navigate that?
Well, in terms of, the last part of the question, kids who are very sensitive to trauma. I mean, obviously parents have to know their own child, that own child's history. If there's been a set of traumatic events that have, that might be re-triggered by certain things, you want to tread carefully. But generally speaking, there is painful history that's painful for everyone, right? It's not just, someone with a particular background and that painful history is important to talk about, but again, in age appropriate ways, right? So, I mean, when I was talking to my son, my 4-year-old, about the history of slavery, I didn't go into all the details about, whippings and beatings and, people being, lynched. And I mean, I didn't talk about the violence of it. I talked about the unfairness of it, and certainly the sadness of being separated from one's family and, that kind of thing. But how much detail you provide is obviously important. But let's use the George Floyd incident, right? I mean, because it was so public and many people were talking about it, and there would be, and even adults that I have had conversations with have talked about how painful it was to watch, right? And to wish maybe they hadn't seen, or, and so how do we talk about something like that, which is so difficult? And yet we can certainly talk about the unfairness. We can certainly talk about what can be done to avoid it. But we also need to understand that a child, let's say a 6-year-old, might be worried, will something like that happen to me? Could that happen to you, Dad or Mom? and so needs some reassurance. The reassurance has to be part of the conversation too. I'm here to protect you. Now, we as adults know you can't protect your child every second. Things happen that are beyond your control. But most of the time, we are able to do that. And we can say, I'm here to protect you. You don't have to worry about that. But at the same time, it is also important to, as a child gets older, to be age appropriate in ways that are protective of him or her. So, for example, we know, speaking as an African American parent, I am the mother of 2 sons. When my kids were old enough to drive, I certainly talked to them about what to do should you ever be stopped while driving, right? You need to keep your hands visible at all times. People, all the things that you need to do to reduce the likelihood of an escalating situation that could put you in harm's way. Now, I know from talking to my white friends, they don't have those conversations, or at least not in the same way with their white teenagers when they're starting to drive, because they don't have that same concern. But being able to talk about why that's important, if I chose not to talk about it, I would place my child at risk.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, I think members of the dominant group, in this case, when relative to racism, white parents might want to talk about what it might mean to be an ally to someone who is being targeted in that way. What would it, call me, what might my child do? It's interesting if you talk to teenagers. If you talk to teenagers who are in racially mixed schools, and if you talk to Black kids who are now starting to sit together in the cafeteria, and you talk to white kids who will say, I used to hang out with so-and-so, but now, he's always sitting with those other friends, or, that there seems to be a rift in the relationship. If you probe, sometimes what has happened that sort of has driven a wedge in the relationship is that maybe an instance of racism has occurred, and the white child did not respond in a way that the Black child found helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you an example, a sports example. Kids, multiracial team, kids are playing football. After the game is over, they're going home, maybe they're walking somewhere, and one of the white kids, uses a racial slur. Not thinking, not trying to be mean even, but just uses a racial slur. Everybody hears it. Nobody says anything about it. It bothers the Black kid. He's hoping that one of the white kids will say, "What's wrong with you? You shouldn't have used that word," or, that was a dumb thing to say. But the silence, the silence of the white friends becomes painful, in some ways more painful than the actual experience of the racial slur. And then it's like, okay, well, I thought these were my friends, but they didn't speak up on my behalf. They didn't speak up. And maybe I need to hang out with some other people. That rupture is likely to be remembered by the kid who heard the slur and the silence, but maybe not remembered by the white kids. They just, he drifted off. He stopped hanging out with us. We don't really know why. So being able to understand those kinds of experiences from the perspective of the person who's been targeted, and to learn how to be the person who speaks up, who is an ally in that situation, goes a long way to being able to maintain relationships across racial lines.
That was a really helpful answer. So I have 2 wrap-up questions for you. So I'm telling you this now, but I'm also telling the people who are running this thing that we're on our last 2 questions, and in a few minutes we'll be ready to wrap. So the first of those 2 wrap questions is, what has either Okay, so I'm pausing because it seemed like a good question at the time. Now I'm wondering. So if it's not a great question, you should just answer the question you want to answer instead.
Okay, all right.
What has either changed or become more urgent in our conversations about race in our communities since the events of the summer of 2020, beginning with the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis by police officers there, and going through the summer of protests over that and other racial violence in our country?
Yeah, I think that certainly, well, people often ask me, why did the murder of George Floyd trigger the protests when, the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, I mean, it triggered Black Lives Matter protests, but it didn't bring white people out of the streets, sort of what was different. And I think there are two things to say about that. One is that the fact that we were experiencing the pandemic and many people were at home, on a screen, watching TV or on their computers or whatever. But at a time when we all had focused energy, let's just say, because we're stuck at home relatively early in the pandemic. And because the video was so clear, 9 minutes almost, and no ambiguity about, did he have a gun? Did he not have a gun? All of that is just so clear, hard to ignore. And just so in your face, hard to ignore. So there's that. But also, I'm thinking actually not so much about George Floyd, but I'm thinking about the assault on the Capitol on January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about both the differential response, where are the police, right? Where are the armed folks keeping control?
National Guard stretched across the steps of the Capitol, or
right. That there's sort of a kind of like indulgence, if I could use that word. That's probably not the right word, but sort of the indulgence of the white protesters in a way that allowed them to escalate into violence, but also the increasing visibility of white nationalist, white supremacist activity, and the recognition in the news and on the screens of people talking about that as a problem of domestic terrorism. I think while some of us have known this to be true for some time, I think for the average news watcher, this is a new scene. All of us can say we've never seen that kind of protest on the Capitol, breaking down windows and people storming the doors and, calling for the hanging of legislators and all kinds of things. That largely white crowd behaving in that way, I think rattled many people. And it speaks to the fact that we are at a moment where we have to make some choices about how we're going to move forward as a society. I'd like to close by referencing Dr. King's last book. He wrote a book called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? It was published in 1968, which was the same year that he was assassinated. But in the book, he talks about the fact that after every period of social progress, every period of what we might call forward movement, there's been pushback against that racial progress. And even though the book was written in 1968, the pattern he describes is visible today, that we could say that leading up to, let's say, the election of the first African-American president, Barack Obama, in 2008, that since that milestone, there's been pushback against that progress. And that pushback certainly occurred during the Obama era. We can think about the the murder of the people at the church in Charleston. There's been a variety of examples I could point to, but but now I think we have seen what chaos looks like. And so the choice is chaos or community. At the very end of his book, Dr. King says, we have a choice to make. We either are going to choose chaos or we're going to choose community. And the choice moment is right now. And I feel like even though that book was written 50 plus years ago, we are at a similar choice point. As a society, we have seen what chaos looks like. And we either are going to say, no, we don't want chaos, in which case, how do we build community? And that is the challenge of today, I think. We live in a multiracial society. We know that there's unfairness. How do we build community? We have to, can't solve a problem without talking about it. We have to talk about it in order to get past it, in order to build a bridge to the beloved community that Dr. King talked about. And if that's what we want to see, it's going to require pushing past our comfort zones to have some conversations we're not used to having, including with our children.
And that, I think, is where we end it. Dr. Tatum, that was fantastic. I learned so much from you in the last 80 minutes or so. And I think I can speak for the thousands of people who are watching tonight that they did as well. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been my honor.
We'll turn it back to
Tatum and Tiziana, thank you both. I mean, that was a really incredible hour. It went by so quickly. It was remarkable. Dr. Tatum, both the way you framed both the larger issues that we're all facing, but also gave everybody very practical, personal things. I think they're probably all feeling much more empowered and motivated out there to have those conversations with their children. And, knowing that folks are going to come away from this will make us all feel a lot more hopeful. And Tiziana, I think folks probably feel like you represented their voice tonight, that you understood what people wanted to know and led the conversation. So thank you both again for taking the time to do this. Thank you to everyone out there in the audience who took the time tonight, and hopefully you feel empowered to move forward on this, and we will all be much more hopeful. And hopefully you'll sign up for a future speaker series event as well. So good night and take care.
night.
Night.